All right, rebuilding on this 383 small block Chevy 350 block, the 400 stroke crank. I made this little, I couldn't find my thread chaser, so I just took an angle grinder with a cutoff reel and cut some grooves in this. Clean these holes out really good for the head bolts, studs, whatever. And then I honed it out, and I honed it out with a 270 and then a 400 grit. That's what the piston's called for. I just used one of those flex hones. That one's a 270, that one's a 400. Now I honed it just enough to put some cross hatchings in the cylinders. You can see it. It's hard to see with that 400 grit. And then I oiled everything up so it don't rust. All the bare metal, I just put a coat of oil on it and just put an oil on a rag and wiped around. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and put the crank back in it. But before we can put the crank in it, we got to put the rear main seal in it. This is a two-piece rear main seal. Some of the newer small block Chevys, this is a one-piece and it has a different crank, blah blah blah. But this one's a two-piece rear main seal. What we're going to do is we're going to put this in. We're going to offset it just a little bit, and then that way one side's sticking up, one side's sticking down. That way you don't have two flat surfaces together. All right, so I had to buy a rear main seal. The girlfriend went to go pick it up from the parts store. I ordered it. So we're going to go ahead and put the bearings in, the block side and the cap. Make sure that you don't get these out of order. You want to put those back in the same place they come out of. But make sure your surfaces are dry, these grooves are nice and clean, and everything. We'll go ahead and set the bearings in. And these bearings do go in a certain way. One side has a hole in it, and one side does not. The side that does not have a hole in it goes in the caps, and then the side that does have a hole in it goes in the block, right where those holes are. You'll notice that one's offset. Got your thrust bearing, or yeah, thrust bearing, and it sets the end play on the sides here. But yeah, there's also a tang in these. You gotta line that tang up and then just push them down in there till they're even. You want these even. All right, there we go. All the bearings are in, all the holes are lined up, and they're all lined up with the tang. And that one I had to take a rubber mallet too, because it ain't as easy. These you can slide in with your hand. Now, same thing with those, except for those don't have a hole in them, and they're all smooth with no hole. But they do have the tangs in them, so you just line up the tangs and slide them right in. All right, I went ahead and dropped the crank in. When you drop it in, you gotta wiggle it and maneuver it a little to get past this bearing. But be very careful that you don't bump the crank on anything to hurt any of the shiny places. There. Because if you gouge the crank real good, you're gonna take it to the machine shop and get it rebuilt or get it turned. But I put it in there dry for now. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna check this one and this one with plastic gauge. This motor's already been in the car. We're just replacing the bearings, putting the same exact bearings in it and everything. Probably really don't need to plastic gauge it or mic it. It's already been mic'd when it was first built. But I'm just gonna put plastic gauge on it because I want to see if it wore any. If anything wore, and see what our clearances are now. So we'll throw the caps on there, same way they come off. and we'll torque everything down from the middle out and see what our plastic gauge reads. And this plastic gauge, you just get it from, I got it from Advanced Auto Parts. It's just got this stuff in here. Cut a little piece off of that and stick it on the main, then put the cap on. All right, set one right there. Then we'll take the cap with the new bearing and just set it right on top of there. And we're going to do one right here too. That's why I put it in dry. I don't want the grease to mess with the readings. But yeah, and we'll do another one right here. And we'll torque everything down and then take everything back off, check our measurements with the plastic gauge, see what we got. Oh, also, as I mentioned, you don't want to get these out of order. But if you do flip them around, the arrow, see the arrow? It points to the front of the motor, towards the timing chain. Right there. The arrow, towards the front. Alright, something I forgot to mention. These are, put oil on your bolts before you put them in. Which I haven't really screwed them in, but I just took this motor apart and they still got oil on them, so I didn't do that. Alright, so these inner bolts, they go to 70. These are stock bolts, stock main caps. The outer bolts go to 65. And we're going to start in the middle. Probably do like 35 here, 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 here. And then we'll go to 35 here on both of these. Here, here, here. And then we'll come back and do 70, 70, 70, 70, 70, 65, 65, 65, like that. All right, torqued them all down and then loosened them all back up in the same order I torqued them down. Then I took these two off. The rest of them are loose. Now we're going to check, see what our measurement is. If we can get in here. If I'm on the right one, I can't see nothing. Well, that's millimeter. We don't want that. We're on the wrong one. Inches. This is the side we need right here. Then we just measure out how much that squished to. So 0.002. 0.002. Not bad. Focus. Yeah, they're both right at 0.002. That one didn't take as good. Yeah. 0.002. Maybe a little under. So I believe the clearance, I'm getting a little on the thing. So I believe the clearance is 0.0021 is the number we're shooting for, and that's about where we're at. So I'm just going to take a rag and rub that off. And rub it off the bearing, and I'm going to take the crank all the way out. See, it'll wipe right off. And I'm going to take the crank all the way out, and then I'm going to lube everything back up, put the rear main seal in it, and we're going to put it in for final this time. I need to check the end gap, or the end play. Should have done that, but we can check that with it all lubed up and everything. If it's out of spec, we'll just have to take it all back out. If you're out of spec, this bearing right here, see where it goes right there? That determines your back and forth on your crank, and that's got to be within a certain measurement too. What I usually do is I just take a rubber mallet and knock it forward, and then measure the gap, and see how much gap is there, and knock it back and see what size, which it should all the way be up against it when you knock it back, and then take a measurement just with a filler gauge. But I do have a mic that we can measure that with now, so we'll check it with a micrometer. All right, so they have these go in with the big lip. See the big lip by my thumb towards the front of the motor, so it'd go in like that. They give you this handy dandy little tool so you can put that right there and snake this around. If the crank was still in the motor, you could, if you was changing it with the motor in the car, you could snake that around, put that right there, like that right there, so that piece don't gouge in on your seal at the bottom there. But I am going to put a small bead of RTV on these top and bottom. But the crank's out of the car now. We can just set it in there just like right there. And we're going to leave this offset a little bit, just so we don't have a flat side, two flat sides lined up. So we'll put it in there offset like that. And that's how much I offset it right there. I might go down just a little bit more. Yeah, about right there. Offset it a little bit. That way you just ain't got two flat surfaces straight across. Now I'm going to lube all my bearings up really good. Set the crank back in it. And this is the stuff I use. Permatex Ultra Slick 81950. Alright, crank's back in. Now, I'm going to smear some RTV on the top of I clean this off real good. Clean this off real good. Clean this off. Same thing on the cap. Now I'm going to put some RTV on this side really good. And I'm going to smear some around here. I'm going to do the same thing over here. And on this side, I'm going to put the RTV on the cap side. And then we'll put it together. But we need RTV in this area, on top of the seal. And then, yeah. Kind of like that right there. That's just a thin layer. I'm just zoomed in. Good enough. Alright, lube the bearings up real good on the caps. And then dropped them back on again the same way they come off. And then I did start in the middle and did 35, 35, 35, 35, 35, and then I did the inners 70, 70, 70, 70, 70, and then I came back and got these 65, 65, 65. And then I went back through them backwards to forward and forward to back, make sure I didn't miss any. So, yeah. So it should spin. If that was oil, it'd spin really easy, but that assembly goo, it's real gooey. But everything turns good. And I don't think we'll have any leaks back here on our rear main seal. And then, yeah, we're going to check the end play. All right, I got a screwdriver in here, prying it back. Then we're going to pry it forward. I don't trust this thing. It bounces around too much. Yeah, see, now we're at 1. And then we pry it back. I was getting 4 thousandths. Yeah, see, it goes 2 that way, and then 2 the other way. Yeah, see, That's 4 thousandths. The acceptable spec is 4,000 to 8 thousandths. We're at 4 thousandths. We're all tightened up. That's all good. The crank's done. Probably the next thing I'm gonna do, lube up the camshaft, stick it back in, and put the new timing chain on it. I'm waiting on the ring gapper tool to do the rings. All right, took the trusty 3-jaw puller, pulled the old timing gear off, and I made note that it was that one. One of these, this chain, it'll advance or retard it a little bit, but there's a triangle and then a rectangle.
If you install it with the keyway to the right of the rectangle, and use the rectangle as the timing mark, it'll retard the timing of the cam a little bit. And then if you use the keyway to the right of the triangle and use the triangle as the timing mark, it'll advance the timing of the cam a little bit. If you put it like I have, the keyway to the right of the circle, that does the cam straight up.
I heated the gear up a little with that MAP gas. I use this socket and that rubber mallet, and it's all the way on. So I haven't done this a time or two. I already know that the cam dowel pin goes right there to line everything up. Now let's slide the gear on and the chain on at the same time, which is kind of hard to do to get it to pivot up on this. So sometimes you got to bring this down and then pivot up on it and then pull it all up. So I had to put it on down here and then twist everything. When you twist it, this mark go this way and this mark go that way. See, but if I turn it back, they'll both be even, and I'll show you that in a minute.
A lot of people think that when you line these timing marks up dot to dot, that is when number 1 cylinder is ready to fire. It is not. It's when number 6 is ready to fire. And LS is the same way, just LS has 2 sets of cylinders that are switched out in the firing order. But when both dots are at 12 o'clock, that's when cylinder number 1 is ready to fire. And if you ever want to stab your distributor based on these timing marks, you can do it that way. Line it up dot to dot first, turn the crank 1 full revolution. That'll put both dots at 12 o'clock on both the gears, and that's when cylinder number 1 is ready to fire.
Your distributor later, put this one at 12 o'clock and this one at 12 o'clock. This, you just want to line them up here because it's easier to line them up this way. All right, so this one's a retrofit roller cam. So we have a cam button that keeps the cam from walking back and forth. And then we got this plate that goes over it to hold it on that lip right there. So I'm gonna go ahead and put that in, and make sure to Loctite your bolts. Put some Loctite on your bolts. I mean, this one's made where you pull these tabs up and it locks the bolts in place, but we're gonna Loctite them anyway. You can see right there, dot to dot. Now see, if I turn the crank that way, the dot goes this way and this one goes that way. So you got to get them turned straight up to each other to see where you're at. But yeah, we're definitely dot to dot. Again, that's cylinder 6. That's not cylinder 1. Which I have a way of figuring out top dead center for cylinder 1 anyway after I get the motor back together. But if you want to stab your distributor off the timing chain, you need to put this one up here, the dot up here, and then this dot right here. All right, we're torqued down to 20 foot-pounds, Loctite. See the Loctite, and I bent these tabs back over. That's my cam button. Ooh. All right, let's clean these surfaces off, and we can go ahead and throw the timing cover back on. All right, I got the timing chain cover on. I clean the block up real good, clean the timing cover up real good, and then I put silicone on the block. I put the gasket on. Then I put silicone over the gasket. And then I put the timing cover on and tighten this up in a crisscross pattern. And it don't go real tight. I just snug it up this wrench. So that's all done. Alright, on these retrofit roller cams, that cam button right here, and this, I call them freeze plugs, back here where it goes on the back of the cam, you're supposed to have 4 thousandths to 10 thousandths slight movement. So I'm prying on this lobe just a little. I pried it forward. That's how much it goes back. And I know from setting up my gears, that's probably not even, it's probably around 5 thousandths. So we're good there. But if we needed to adjust that tighter, we could beat that in. Or you can change these cam buttons out too. But anyway, yeah, that's all done. Next thing, so we're gonna gap some rings. All right, just gapping some rings using a drill bit right there. And you want it to spin this way. You want it to spin down on the ring, not up. You just do one. A lot of people hold it together and do both sides, but you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to just do one side. But per the directions, 15 to 30 pounds boost, gas alky E85, 0707. I already checked the oil rings. They're all over 015 by themselves. But that 07 number, 007 number is multiplied by the cylinder size, which puts us at 028 to 0.032. So I'm going to put them around 032. And the way you check it is you stick the ring down in the hole. And I've been using this old burnt piston we had the issue with. And I use this to get it straight. I just flatten the edges with that side right there. And over here, make sure it's straight. Like that. Then you pull that out there and you want to measure that gap right there. And we're shooting, we got a 0.032 filler gauge right here. We want that to, look at that. Well, I didn't take much at all with that tool. Probably went a little too much, but yeah, that's good. There's some slight drag there. So that one's done. But now this is going to go on piston 1. And then when I do the rings for piston 2, I'm going to check them in, or 3. 1, 3, 5, 7. I'm going to put them on piston 3. And now these have a dot on them. When they have a dot on them, the dot goes up towards the top of the piston. But you want to take your time doing this. Hit it with a ring gapper tool. Just a little, check it. Do a little, check it. Do a little, check it. This is tedious. This takes the longest of anything rebuilding these, but in my opinion. But yeah, take your time. Grind on it a little bit, check it. Grind on it a little, check it. Grind on it a little, check it until you get there. When you put these rings on the pistons, you can spiral them on. Stick one side in the groove and then spiral them on over the top. And then when you get here, pull out, which it'll be up here, pull out on it, lift up and bring it down so it don't scratch the side of the piston. But yeah, 2 down. That thing works good. Oh, and I've been using that emery cloth to clean up the edges where I sand it down. Oh, also you can take a broken ring, an old ring, and break it in half and kind of scrape out these edges to clean them up real good. Down inside the grooves, if they're real bad dirty, these aren't that bad. So the top ring, we're going to gap those now. These are gas ported rings, and they got this slot in them. and that slot goes up towards the top of the piston. So let's gap these. These are going to be a little bit harder because these are steel. All right, rings are gapped in. We're going to put one gap down here, the other gap up here, 180 out, and then I'll probably put the oil ring gaps probably in this area right here on one side, and that same area on the other side. Probably in here somewhere. Yeah, right in here on this side on the bottom, and the same side on the top on the other side. Now this is a 383, so the wrist pin goes into the piston oil groove here. So they give you this spacer to put in, and the spacer has a dot. See that dot? That's actually a down indentation. You got to make sure that that is in one of these gaps. It don't matter where in the gap, but it keeps it from spinning out of that gap, because you don't want the open end of that to make it over here to the gap. If the opened end makes it over here to the gap, that's not good. So that divot keeps it from sliding back and forth. Now we're going to put the oil rings in. You put this oil ring in. You put this big funky one in first. Now you put the funky one in first, and you butt them together like that. And then the other, those top and bottom slim rings, then you put those on next. See if we can zoom in here. See that ledge where my thumb's at? They rest on that ledge and hold this in on both sides. So you put this in first, and then you put the bottom one in, or the top one, it don't matter. It sets on these ledges, and then you put the other one in that sets on the ledges, but this one goes in first. And you'll know it's in correctly if everything's moving together all as one piece. See how it moves all together? All three pieces. Just like that. All right, there's a certain way these pistons go in. You'll see and this one's number 2. Now, on small block Chevy, if yours has different size valve reliefs, the bigger one's for the intake. And on small block Chevy, this is the front of the motor here. It goes exhaust, intake, intake, exhaust. And then the next one, which is missed, exhaust, intake, and then intake, exhaust. And when they go in, 2, 4, 6, 8 go up against the crank on the back side of the motor. The tangs go down towards the oil pan. See, this one would go in just like that. This side would be up against the crank. Wish I could get that to stand there, but I can't. Now it's the same thing on this side. Exhaust, intake, intake, exhaust. Exhaust, intake, intake, exhaust. But now see, these odd ones, they'll go up against the crank towards the front of the motor. See this beveled side? This beveled side goes against the crank. And then the 2 flat sides, they go together. Just like that. So this piston would be facing this way. This piston would be facing that way. That's 7 and 8. And then beveled side up against the crank on both sides. See? And then flat sides in the middle. Flat sides up against each other. And again, both tangs go down towards the oil pan. That's 7 and 8. 1, 2 are the same way. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. They're all the same way. And that's how they go in. So this one came with floating pins, so we had to install the pistons on the rods. When you do that, you want to keep in mind exhaust, intake, intake, exhaust. Exhaust, intake, intake, exhaust. And then You want to think tangs down. The odd ones are going to go up against the crank on this side on all of them. And then the even side, the passenger side. The odd side is the driver's side. The even side is the passenger side. And then they'll all go up against the crank. The even side will all go up against the crank on the back side. So you have bevel there. Odd ones, the bevel need to be on this side. And then the tangs that hold the bearing, they go together on the caps, and they need to go down. But I usually use a ring compressor to install the pistons. But Chris has this handy dandy where he built the motor last time. So we're going to use that. And we'll just dip the pistons in oil. Make sure your bearings, make sure that your rings, when you put it down in there, or in the ring compressor to put it in the hole, that these top and middle ring need to be spaced out 180 degrees. And then your oil bearing, that middle piece, and the two top and bottoms, the grooves need spaced out on those as well. And try to not line any of the grooves up in all of these. All three for the oil ring, this one and that one. Try to separate them all. And again, if you have a 383 or a piston that goes, the piston pin goes up into the oil ring hole, make sure that you put this spacer in here with this divot facing down. See, they'll all have the divot. It's got to be in this area on either side, it don't matter. But yeah, that divot's got to be there. But I numbered all these when I took them out. This is the one that it burnt the piston. We bought a new piston and I already put it on. That pin just slides right through both of them. Make sure you got your orientation right. This one's number 2, so it's going to be exhaust intake. Tangs down towards the oil pan, and then, like I said, it's going to go up against the crank this way. So the beveled side needs to be to the left on the even ones, and then the flat side in the middle. But if you have to put your pistons together, keep that in mind. And yeah, I'm just going to oil them up, stick them in this hole, and then put them in the cylinder and lightly tap them into place. When you do this, make sure the journal for those rods and pistons is all the way down. You don't want it up towards the hole. That way it gives you room. And be careful not to hit your rod on your crank as you're putting it in. And if yours has the rod bolts that are sticking out of the bottom of it, be especially careful. What I usually do on those is I'll put fuel line over those bolts so the bolt doesn't hit the crank. If the bolt hits that crank and scratches it, you probably have to take it out and get it turned. But yeah, that's what's next. Alright, cleaned and lubed up my journal. I had that stuff on there to keep them from rusting. But I cleaned that off. I put lube on it. Put my bearing on. These only go in one way. You gotta just line up the tang. Good to go. Now we're gonna dip this down in oil, and we're gonna stick it in there. Right there, and making sure that all of our rings are separated. Alright, again, make sure your valve reliefs are up towards the intake part. Make sure your journal's all the way down, and then we're just going to tap it in. I just use the back of a hammer, and I'll need 2 hands to do this. But once we get it in there, we'll have to reach with one hand and guide it on here, and then tap on it with the other hand up here. Alright, I tapped it in and guided it on. And now we're going to put the bearing on the cap and put it in tang side to tang side. And the tang side should be facing me. And it is. There we go. And then the beveled side of the rod up against the crank. This is the flat side. They'll go rod to rod. And when we put number 1 in, that's why these are numbered 1 through 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's why they're numbered that way, even though, but 2, 4, 6, 8 come up on passenger side, and 1, 3, 5, 7 on the driver's side. But we'll put the bearing on the cap, put the cap on, tighten her down. All right, there we go. Put the bearing in. Got some oil on my lens. Tank has to go in the groove, and then here we're gonna go tank side, just like that. Tank side, and see, that'll put the flat side here, which will go rod to rod, and then the groove side will go up against the crank. And clean your bearing surfaces off too. You want it nice and dry when you put the bearings on. All right, there we go, guys. It's all back together. We had one of the oil pickups that bolted on. For some reason, the tabs broke off, so I ordered another one of those. But yeah, all these, this side right here, beveled side up against the crank, flat side in the middle. Tangs go towards the oil pan, so on these two, the tangs should be right here. On these two, the tangs should be this side and this side. The closest side towards the oil pan, where the tangs would go. You know, same thing on that one. Tang would go there, tang would go there. Beveled side up against the crank, flat side in the middle. And then, I know it's upside down, but exhaust, intake, intake, exhaust. Exhaust, intake, intake, exhaust. Just like that. Same thing on the other side. If you're looking at the piston like this, and you got the top at the top, all of them, the bevel goes on the left hand side. The flat side on the rod goes on the right hand side, no matter how you look at it. Because look, that one, that's number 2, so it'll come up here, beveled side on the left hand side. This one down here, number 1, bevel on the left hand side. See? And if you got pistons with 4 valve reliefs, they'll usually have a dot. The dot goes towards the front of the motor. If it's got 4 equal valve reliefs and there's no dot, I don't think it matters how they go on. But if you got valve reliefs that are different sizes, and you only got them on the top, it goes towards the intake side. Exhaust, intake, intake, exhaust. Exhaust, intake, intake, exhaust, which is completely different from an LS. LS is intake, one side it's intake, exhaust. Well, we'll go over here and look. Yeah, see on this side, there's the intake runner. Intake, exhaust, intake, exhaust, intake, exhaust, intake, exhaust. So now on this side, see there's the runner. Exhaust, intake, exhaust, intake, exhaust, intake, exhaust, etc. Yeah, it's a little bit different on those. But we're messing with Gen 1 small block Chevy, which is the same as a Gen 2 small block Chevy. And that's Gen 3. Those are both Gen 3 5.3s. But Chris is coming from the airport. He gonna come help me. And by the time we get back from the airport, that old pickup should be in here. We'll put that in, bolt it down, put the oil pan on, flip it over, put the heads, intake, water pump, everything else back on it. We gotta get a filter. Yeah. See y'all for part 2. Oh, also, the torque on these, the inner bolts were 70 foot-pounds. All of them. I think I went over that already. The outer bolts are 65. Now, usually, stock rod bolts, I think, are 45, but these are aftermarket rods and bolts. They go to 63. This goes to 65, the oil pump, and there is not a gasket that goes here. And if you're putting this piece on, some people ask if there's a gasket that goes there. There is. But most people don't use it. We don't use a gasket there. I think the last one I built, the Gen 2, I did put the gasket there just because it was in the kit. But you don't have to use a gasket. This piece that bolts on right here, you don't have to use a gasket there. Some people do, some people don't. But that one does not use a gasket. And yeah, I just wanted to add that. Oh, and I also forgot, before you put your oil pump on, put that rod down in there. That's what the crank turns the timing gear, turns the cam turns the distributor that goes up here, and then the distributor turns this shaft and turns the oil pump. That's what gets your oil pressure. But don't forget that shaft. Most of them have a plastic piece right here. We've got the aftermarket shaft with the metal one on it, but make sure it goes in the groove. And the plastic one actually lock in. There's the plastic one. It was in the gasket kit. Of course I don't use it because we've got that metal one that's pinned in there. But yeah, do not forget that. Put your put that down in the hole first. Or actually connect it to this, then stick it in with the oil pump, then bolt the oil pump down. This plastic one's got like a little groove down in there, and it'll lock in that groove right there. This aftermarket one, it's riveted to the shaft itself that goes down in here, and when you put the distributor in it, it holds it in place. Yeah, that's it now.